Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett,
And I'm Sabrina.
and today in our 445th episode, we're talking all about swamps. Dinosaurs and
Ooh.
swamps.
We don't talk about swamps a lot.
We don't. And the reason we're talking about swamps is because the third episode of Prehistoric Planet 2 is about swamps. And in this episode, we're going to talk about Pachycephalosaur headbutting, Austroraptor fishing, and T-Rex hunting at night.
Of those three dinosaurs, the only one that I would have guessed, if that was all I heard, was the Austroraptor fishing for swamps.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Because you don't think of Pachycephalosaurs in swamps, or T-Rex for that matter. But there are reasons, which we'll get into. And we also have Dinosaur of the Day, Falca Takely, or maybe it's Falca Takeli. Not exactly sure how the Latin and Malagasy combine into an English pronunciation, but it's that cool little toucan-toothed bird-looking thing that we talked about the other day.
You're giving it all away.
Well, we already gave that away the other day.
True.
And then we've got our fun fact, which is about T-Rex eye sizes and other really big eyes.
What big eyes you have.
Mm-hmm. But before we get into all of that, we want to thank some of our patrons. And we're recording this episode a little bit earlier than usual, so we're not thanking any new patrons, but we do have 10 existing patrons to thank. And they are Keith, Elijah, Jeff, Eric, Diplodocate, Daniel McGill, Ranger Chris from Dino for Hire, Anna Rose, Christine, and Linda.
Yeah, thank you so much, existing patrons. We love all our patrons, and you're the reason we can keep doing the show, so thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And why, when something like Prehistoric Planet 2 comes out and we suddenly get access to the videos, we can rush through and work on it all and release a little mini series on it because we're working on this full time because of the support of our patrons. So jumping into dinosaurs in swamps.
Yeah, in Prehistoric Planet 2, it covers some areas that we've already seen in the third episode, that we've seen in past episodes, but there are new dinosaurs and new scenarios, and there's 5 areas in this episode. There's the Songliao Basin, the Allen Formation, the Maverano Formation, the Scullard Formation, and the Hell Creek Formation.
Yeah, and especially with the Hell Creek Formation, I usually don't think of that as a swamp.
No, I guess because today, Hell Creek to me means Badlands.
Yes.
And so then I don't often remember to think about what it was like in the Cretaceous.
Yeah. And then the other thing is it was by the Western Interior Seaway, which obviously is ocean. But I don't think of swamps at the interface of oceans. I just think of it as like a beach, I guess, or something. But a really useful definition of the word swamp is a wetland that is forested. I like that definition a lot.
Mm-hmm.
On Earth, now swamps are not much of the total land area. It may have been more in the Cretaceous. I couldn't find a good estimate for it. But nowadays, wetlands only account for about 6% of Earth's land.
Well, another reason we might not think about it too much.
Yeah, it is a fairly uncommon type of land. But wetlands aren't just swamps. They include marshes, floodplains, and other areas that are wetlands but don't have trees, that aren't forests.
Mm-hmm.
But the definition is a little bit loose. So some people say that all 6% of wetlands count as swamps because they basically just say like, well, wetlands, swamps, whatever, it's all the same. Other places are like, no, it has to have this scale of tree in order to qualify as a swamp. Otherwise, it's just a marsh or something else.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it's always at a transition between land and water, and it's a good place to see terrestrial and aquatic animals interacting. It's also a good place to be if you're semi-aquatic like a crocodile because there's land you can go up on. There's also water you can swim in.
Yep. Chase your prey by swimming and running.
Yep. Or lay your eggs on the land and then get back in the water. Whatever you need to do. So when I hear of a swamp, I imagine what's more scientifically called a bog. A bog is a wetland full of decaying plants.
Bogs don't sound great.
No. Well, to me, the term swamp is not like an attractive thing.
Do you think swamp monster?
Yeah. Just like, this gross sort of decaying unpleasant place. But that's really not what a swamp means. Again, it's a wetland that has trees in it.
It's where Kermit the Frog would sing Rainbow Connection.
Yeah, that's one of the places for sure. He might just be in a regular pond, but I guess if the pond has trees around it, that makes it a swamp. Swamps can also be places like the Everglades too, where it's like lots of trees and water around. It doesn't matter if it's freshwater or saltwater, both can be swamps. And it can also be a swamp whether the water is moving or if it's completely stagnant.
Oh, that's interesting, because when I think swamps, my first thought was stagnant water for some reason.
Yeah, it's usually slow-moving water at a swamp, but it can be at the interface of like a river and things like that as well. Swamps are really important for humans because they can absorb excess water to reduce flooding, and they also protect coastlines during storms, basically in the same mechanism. If there's a big storm, it sort of messes up the swamp temporarily, the swamp recovers. But if you just have a cliff face or something with a bunch of buildings above it, the storm will just beat up that cliff and erode it, which is a problem because a lot of areas where there used to be swamps, the swamps have been drained for either converting to farmland or just building buildings. And then the coastlines are a lot more vulnerable because they don't have the swamps protecting them. Swamps are also great places to collect food, even for humans. According to National Geographic, quote, 2/3 of the fish and shellfish that are commercially harvested worldwide are linked to wetlands.
Oh, and wetlands are only, you said, what, 6% of Earth?
Yes.
Interesting.
So they really punch above their weight in terms of impact on fish.
Yeah.
National Geographic says from Brazil's varzeas, or freshwater swamps surrounding the Amazon River, to saltwater swamps near the Florida Keys, commercially valuable fish species that depend on wetlands are threatened with extinction, end quote. And part of this is because a lot of fish breed in wetlands. So even fish that are caught far out into the ocean might rely on wetlands during the breeding season. So you might think like, oh, there's a fisherman that's doing deep sea fishing. What do they care? Like all those fish rely on the ocean, but they don't care about wetlands, but they might actually, because they might go there to spawn.
Some fish travel a long ways to spawn.
They do, yeah. It can be pretty complicated. One last benefit of swamps is that they hold an enormous amount of carbon in the form of peat. Peat is basically dense, partially decayed plant matter that doesn't decay completely because it's sitting in acidic anaerobic conditions, which stops the decay process. We've sort of alluded to this in the past because in a long enough time scale, that peat can turn into coal. And coal and other fossil fuels, again, are not made of dinosaurs. They're mostly made out of plants. But yeah, so peat is basically this natural carbon sequestration that happens, and it happens in swamps. For dinosaurs, they were certainly important for species that appreciated that close proximity between trees and lots of water. For example, many dinosaurs that liked fishing would have spent a lot of time in swamps. It'd be handy to sort of hang out in a tree. They could live in a tree and then they could fly down and grab some fish or climb down, depending on if they have wings that are functional.
Yeah. Or even the plant eaters. Lots of vegetation around.
Absolutely, because we know Equisetum, the horsetail, is one of the most nutritious plants, we think, for dinosaurs. And you see a lot of that at swamps in those like lower, not so deep water that isn't moving too fast.
I'm thinking of the Dinocyrus scene in Prehistoric Planet in season 1.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that was definitely a swamp.
It was eating plants. It was scratching itself, having a grand old time.
Yeah. Yeah, there are definitely swamps in a lot of other scenes in Prehistoric Planet other than just the swamp episode. That's true of all the like sort of general categories of the episodes. Some dinosaurs also probably went to swamps to make nests because we know many birds do that today. According to USGS, wetlands are so popular with birds because they can get the exact depth of water that they like. For example, if they're standing in water to fish, they might want one that's deep enough for fish, but not too deep because they want their legs to reach the bottom. And they also can get ample amounts of food and material to make shelters without too many predators around, because a lot of times swamps aren't the most hospitable for the specific animals that might be hunting those birds. So there's a lot of great things about swamps.
Yeah.
And they are not just the gross, decaying bogs that I envision when I hear the word swamp.
With monsters.
I guess in your case, they have monsters.
Not really. The phrase swamp monster keeps coming to mind. I don't know why.
Probably because it is a character in the show Dinosaurs.
That's right. And we just watched that episode recently.
Yeah, the baby is afraid of the swamp monster. Yeah. But yeah, they're basically just any wetland with trees around, or not trees, depending on how loose you want to be with it. So in Prehistoric Planet 2, in the third episode with the swamps, they started off in the Songliao Basin. In the episode, they call it the, quote, vast swamps of Northeast Asia. But fortunately for us, we got some press materials and they specified that it's meant to be the Songliao Basin.
That would have been really difficult for us to figure out on our own.
It would have been basically impossible because the dinosaurs, or the animals, there aren't any dinosaurs in the scene, the animals that they name aren't really known particularly from that formation. They're known from more Mongolia and like the Jadokta formation.
Well, the scene also has baby Azhdarchids, but it doesn't specify which type of Azhdarchids.
Yes. And I don't think those are found in this basin yet either. But yeah, I think that's why they went with the generic baby Azhdarchid, because it's like, oh yeah, they were probably there. They were all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So the Songliao Basin is a different time period than I think all of the other formations in the entire series.
Yeah. Oh, and just real quick, it's in China.
Yeah, it's in northeast China. New research from Wang Wendong and others, published last month, actually.
That is new.
Dated the area to 83 to 85 million years ago. This is about 10 to 15 million years older than all of the other scenes. They're basically all within the last 6 to 7 million years of the Cretaceous, and this is more like almost 20 million years before the end of the Cretaceous.
Is it still considered late Cretaceous?
It is definitely still late Cretaceous. Late Cretaceous starts at 100 million years ago. So we're well into late Cretaceous, but late Cretaceous is a very, very long time span.
Kind of like late Triassic?
Yeah. This is even longer than late Triassic, actually. I think all the other formations, too, are Maastrichtian. This one's Campanian, or maybe even a stage earlier than that. So yeah, it's a pretty different place. They describe the area as a lacustrine and delta facies deposit. In other words, lake and river deltas. But in Prehistoric Planet, it's depicted with many trees, which makes it officially a swamp.
Because you need trees in some people's definitions to be a swamp.
Yes. The Songliao Basin is not a very popular area in terms of vertebrate paleontology research. I think this is maybe the first time that I had read of that basin, but it includes the Nenjiang Formation, which we've heard of at least. That area is known for crocodilomorphs such as Rugosuchus and paralligator. In Prehistoric Planet, there's also the close relative of those two, Chamasuchus, and also that unnamed Azhdarchid baby.
Mm-hmm. They interact.
Yeah. The Nenjiang Formation also has a bunch of mollusks and fish, as well as unidentified species of turtle, mammal, dromaeosaur, troodontid, and possibly a tyrannosaur. All of those dinosaurs, though, are based on just teeth, which were published last year.
Oh, that's also new.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wonder if that's why they're picking this formation, because it's sort of a new, up-and-coming, interesting place.
Yeah.
Where we're starting to learn some new things about it. The Songliao Basin is sort of a similar environment to the Jehol group, which was also in northeast China, although the Jehol biota is about 40 million years earlier. We've talked about that one quite a bit. If they do a third season, I really hope they do the Jehol biota.
Think of all the feathered dinosaurs.
There are so many, and they could easily just do an entire season on the Jehol biota because there are so many dinosaurs there. You've got Eutyrannus, the big feathered tyrannosaur. There's Caudipteryx with its big fan of tail feathers weirdness. There are Therizinosaurs. There's a ton of dromaeosaurs, and then also a whole bunch of early birds.
I wonder how many millions of hairs or feathers would be on Eutyrannus if they had 3 million for the small mammal.
Yeah. Well, feathers cover more ground, but yeah, if you're talking about a feather, each one has, I don't know how many hundreds of those little filaments sticking off of it. So yeah, that would be quite a feat. Even if they make a season 3, though, I don't know if they'll get there because we've only gone back now at most 80 million years, and only in this one specific spot. Everything
Mhm.
else is basically still just the last 6 to maybe 10 million years of the Cretaceous.
They could just keep this series going indefinitely.
Yeah. I would love it if they just went back like 5 million years at a time and just kept going. We were at like season 70 of Prehistoric Planet. I would be very excited about that.
That would be amazing.
And there are some other formations too, but first we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
Another formation in this episode is the Allen Formation, and it's located in what is now Argentina. It's from about 73 to 69 million years ago. It's it was semi-arid, and it had some coastal marine environments. So that makes sense for a swamp episode.
Yep.
In terms of the dinosaurs that have been found there, they've found dinosaur eggs. There's also dromaeosaurs like Ostroraptor, hadrosaurs like Bonapartosaurus, titanosaurs like Bonatitan, abelisaurids like Niebla, and nodosaurs like Patagopelta. There were also pterosaurs and fish and snakes, plesiosaurs, frogs, and mammals.
Yeah, suppose for every swamp, there should be fish as well as things that live on land. Because otherwise, the classification as a swamp is questionable.
Does that include frogs too?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, but fish fossilize pretty well. So it seems like
Yeah.
should at least be able to fight a fish if it's going to be a swamp.
Maybe some invertebrates.
Oh, I guess that's true. Yeah. Because with the Songliao Basin, it was a lot of like mollusks.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some gastropods.
Yep.
Snails. There's also the May-Verano Formation, and if that sounds familiar, it's because we talked about it in episode 443. That's when we were discussing the first episode of Prehistoric Planet 2 in Madagascar. In that episode, that's where we saw the Adalatherium, the badger-like mammal that has, between the mother and babies, 3 million hairs that they made.
Yeah.
And the Matsoya, the huge prehistoric snake, Machikosaurus with its usually crazy teeth, but less so in Prehistoric Planet, the cute little Simosuchus, and the not-so-cute Majungasaurus.
Yep. It's a really good formation. I love that one.
Mm-hmm.
And there are even more animals that they talked about in this episode.
Yes. Then there's the Scholard Formation that's located in what is now southwestern Alberta. It includes the same time period as the Hell Creek Formation in the US, but it goes a little bit earlier and a little later in time. There's actually a little bit of the Paleogene after the dinosaurs went extinct. There are a lot of ferns and conifers here. Some mammals have been found, but that's rare. In terms of the dinosaurs, a lot of indeterminate theropods, also Ornithomimus. Then Torosaurus and Triceratops. So depending on how you feel about that.
Or just Triceratops and Triceratops.
Yeah.
Triceratops and adult Triceratops.
Yep. Edmontonia, Ankylosaurus, Edmontosaurus, Leptoceratops, that's Ceratopsian, and of course Pachycephalosaurus. I bring that up because that's where we see the headbutting scenes in this episode of Prehistoric Planet.
Yep.
And then the last formation in this episode is the Hell Creek, which we've talked about the Hell Creek a lot on our show. So I'm not going to tell you the same old stuff that we usually talk about.
Probably the most famous formation, maybe in all of paleontology.
Yeah. So as a quick overview, it covers parts of what's now Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Back then, it was a humid climate, possibly subtropical. There were a lot of floodplains and swamps, a lot of plants, including many angiosperms, which are the flowering plants. Those lucky dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And of course, it's famous for its dinosaurs like T-Rex, Triceratops, Edmontosaurus. Those are the three that appear in episode 3 of Prehistoric Planet 2. There's also Parasaurolophus, Dakotaraptor, many, many more. And then, just to round it out, you've also got pterosaurs, crocodiles, lizards, snakes, turtles, frogs, salamanders, mammals, and of course, fish.
Let you know it might be a swamp.
Guess we should have known then, or we could have figured it out.
Yep.
All right, so on to the filming locations for episode 3 and the animals associated with them. We start off with that scene of the baby Azhdarchids flying, kind of learning to fly, flying for the first time. And Shamosuchus, that crocodile, almost gets one because they're flying over this body of water.
Not just almost gets one.
Oh, it did get one?
Oh, yeah, they got a couple of them, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm I forgot about that part. I remember the part where one gets away.
Yeah, they do tend to end on like the happy note of like, wait, here's the one. There is one that made it. Don't be sad.
Yeah. And like we were saying earlier, that crocodile, it's going after its prey in the water and on land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it might be the most intense scene in the show, actually. At least it gave me the most, I don't know, emotional reaction. Basically, because you're waiting the whole time to see if Shamasukas pops up out of the water.
Mhm.
It's kind of like a Jack in the Box situation where there's that anticipation, like, when's it gonna come?
Or Jaws.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, is the pterosaur high enough this time, or is it drifting too low? Is it going to be able to snag it out of the air? Yeah, it was a very intense scene. I think they did a great job with that one.
Yeah. So to film these scenes, they went to 3 different places. There's Greenfield Lake Park in Wilmington, North Carolina, and it's a 250-acre park, apparently very dog-friendly, and there's lots of biking and walking trails.
It's a lot friendlier than it used to be.
Yeah.
Although this isn't the same place, because this was in China.
Yeah, the Songliao Basin, so. There's also the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge in Georgia. They provide a habitat for threatened and endangered species, including the wood stork and indigo snake. And they've got a swamp that's a shallow 438,000 acre peat-filled wetland.
It's got the peat.
Yeah, sounds like a perfect filming location. And then there's Black River, North Carolina, which is a tributary, meaning it flows into a larger river, and in this case, it flows into Cape Fear River. It's about 53 miles long, and it's home to rare fish and mussels.
Nice. Yeah, all the mentions of the rare animals and how the different animals like those places is why people are always emphasizing how we got to protect wetlands, which means swamps, it turns out.
Yes. So after that tense scene with the baby Azhdarchids, we see Ostroraptor, which is this bird-like dinosaur, but much bigger. Well, bigger than most birds. 20 feet, 800 pounds.
That is bigger than most birds.
Yep.
All modern birds.
It's depicted as having teeth like a crocodile's, and it's got a snout that makes it good for fishing. So it catches some fish. And then they later fight over those fish that they caught.
Yeah, the depictions of Ostroraptor remind me a lot of wading birds, similar to how Spinosaurus has been proposed to fish out of water. Although Spinosaurus, sometimes they say that it put its mouth in the water and just left its mouth open and waited for a fish to swim through before snapping close. I could see why they didn't do that with Ostroraptor, since its mouth is not nearly as long and skinny. And also the success with that strategy probably depends on how clear the water is, because if a fish can tell it's swimming between a bunch of teeth, sharp teeth, it might be smart enough to avoid it. I guess it depends on the fish. But yeah, snapping down into the water does seem like it would probably work better for something like an Ostroraptor, especially if they had those quick reflexes and strong neck and all that. I would love to see a prehistoric planet version of Spinosaurus, though, although I don't blame them for not wanting to take a crack at the accurate restoration of Spinosaurus.
Because by the time they built it, it might be considered inaccurate.
Yeah, almost certainly. Well, no matter how you build it right now, someone's going to consider it inaccurate. And certainly no matter how you depict it walking and standing and swimming, people are going to have thoughts.
That's true.
But it would still be fun to see.
Oh, we've talked about Ostroraptor before in episode 303.
Yeah, it's an Unenlagian. That's the group of raptors from South America, thus the Austro part of its name, which means southern in Latin.
Yep, and it's been found in the Allen Formation in southern Argentina. To film the Ostroraptor scene, they went to Great Otway National Park in Victoria, Australia. This park has over 250,000 acres. It's home to lots of koalas. You can also see glowworms along the stream banks and walking tracks. And it's home to a lot of birds. It's identified by BirdLife International as an important bird area. I really like that designation.
Yeah.
Now, according to the press notes we got, the team collected fish from a fishmonger for the sequence, and then they drove several hours in the summer heat with that fish, so that stunk up their car. They also used a screwdriver to simulate bite marks of Ostroraptor on the fish.
Screwdriver.
Little teeth pricks.
Yeah.
After the Ostroraptor scene, we go back to Madagascar, the Maevarano Formation, where we see Rhapetosaurus, and we covered that dinosaur back in episode 311. The scene actually starts with a baby Machikosaurus. That took us probably too long to figure out that it was a baby Machikosaurus.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to recognize because I'm expecting those crazy teeth sticking out. But yeah, it was, in fact, supposed to be Machikosaurus.
We did confirm that with Darren Naish, so glad we got to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on Paleobio database looking up every animal in the formation, and I was like, what could it be? I don't see anything in there that looks like this small bipedal thing. But yeah, it was just a Machikosaurus all along.
Yes. And then we move on to one of my favorite parts of season 2, which is the Beelzebufo, the devil toad trying to attract a mate.
Yeah, and it almost gets squished by a careless sauropod.
No. That's not how it comes off.
The shot of it is like this poor frog sitting in the pond, and then this giant foot comes in, and it's like, oh no.
They notice eventually. They get curious.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thinks about eating it.
The toad, the Beelzebufo, it's really cute. It's going down a hill, and it kind of somersaults down the hill. I like that. And it's trying to attract a mate via sound in the middle of a mud puddle. But, like you were saying, it gets cut off by a herd of Rhapetosaurus because they're coming by to take a mud bath. And they're just relaxing, hanging out. It ends up working out for the frog, though, later. So that's good. And we talked a little bit about that scene with Mike and Tim in last week's episode, and specifically the camera angles.
Yeah, I loved that. And the idea that they basically set it up as if they were intending to shoot the Beelzebufo, and then they had to change strategies halfway through, or they're like thinking a film crew would be changing strategies halfway through to shoot the Rhapetosaurus, and how that affected, how everything looked. And it really does make it more effective. You don't think about it while you're watching the show, but it really does add a lot to that sort of innate nature documentary, this is real life vibe that you have, that it looks just like Planet Earth, except with dinosaurs.
Now, also, according to the press notes, Beelzebufo had a bite force of over 2,000 newtons, or 200 kilograms / roughly 440 pounds, and that rivals modern wolves and tigers. But this frog's only about 13 inches or 34 centimeters long and weighs a little over 4 pounds or nearly 2 kilograms.
That's crazy. That is a lot of pound for pound strength.
Yes.
Or specifically, it's like 100 pounds per pound of strength. Yeah, they're not nearly as big as they are in something like Ark either, because I think you can ride them in Ark, the video game. Yeah, they're really, really big. They're really big for a frog.
Yeah, but 4 pounds is not big enough for a human to ride.
No.
It could hold its own against those sauropods with that bite force. It was fine. It was fine.
As long as it didn't get stepped on.
So to film this scene, they went back to the Lower Zambezi National Park in Zambia. We talked about that one in episode 443. It's known for its wildlife, which isn't necessarily appreciated when you're making a documentary about
that place.
Dinosaurs that no longer exist.
Like the elephants rolling in and all that.
Yeah. The park was declared a national park in 1983, and before that, it was the private game reserve of Zambia's president. Quick fun fact there.
Yeah, it's not too far from Madagascar either. It's one of the ones that's actually on the closer side of modern filming location to ancient ecosystem.
Oh, you know what? The Rhapetosaurus also helped the Beelzebufo out a lot, because when they leave, their tracks are so big it makes more mud puddles, so the frog has more chances for attracting mates.
It's got more options.
Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, it works out. So then we move on to the Scullard Formation. That's in what's now Alberta, Canada. And that's where we have the Pachycephalosaur headbutting. And I'd say the debate continues, because I feel like this is going to be an ongoing debate for a while. Now, according to the press notes, 22% of male Pachycephalosaurs had head injuries, and one animal had 23 lesions on the dome of its skull. That's a lot of lesions.
Yeah. In their behind the scenes, that's what they basically point to as the main evidence for headbutting, that there are all these marks on the skull that look like headbutting. It's pretty good evidence. It's similar to Triceratops with the gouges on their frills from other horns.
Mm-hmm.
You say like, well, how did it get that? It seems to match pretty well. It were probably bumping heads. And they also used analogs to bighorn sheep and similar animals that sort of headbutt / wrestle. And the microstructure of the head does look strong and able to withstand a big impact. Those are some of the key points they went through, which sent me down a mini rabbit hole of Pachycephalosaurus headbutting.
Okay.
Because usually when we talk about this, my first thought is, what about the neck strength?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I think about headbutting or anything happening to my head, what happens to my neck is like a close second consideration. There has been some research on this, so I figured I'd do a little review. So back in 1997, Kenneth Carpenter said that he thought dome headbutting was unlikely due to the small contact area, and flank butting was more likely, meaning rather than going head to head, smashing domes against each other,
Mm-hmm.
they would go dome head to flank or like shoulder side of the other Pachycephalosaur. And the goal would be not to bash your head into their head, but to bash your head into their side and either knock them over or just injure them with a good strong smash.
Yeah, they do both in Prehistoric Planet.
They do, yes. The way Kenneth Carpenter put it was, quote, 2 types of flank butting are recognized on the basis of dome structure. Type 1 is seen in Pachycephalosaurus, Prenocephaly, and Stegosaurus, all of which had tall, rounded frontoparietal domes. Such domes would maximize the mass of the head in flank-directed blows. Pain would be felt by the opponent without causing serious injury. Type 2 is seen in Stygimoloch, in which squamosal horns are developed along the posterior margins of the dome. These horns seem to be an adaptation for causing maximum pain locally during flank butting without causing serious injury. The horns probably were not sharp but blunted, end quote.
Stygimoloch, now thought to be Pachycephalosaurus.
Yeah, depending on who you ask.
Yep.
I think most people are okay with that, them getting lumped together and Stygimoloch just being like a juvenile
Mm-hmm.
Pachycephalosaurus. But the reason I like that quote so much is because in Prehistoric Planet 2, they seem to have gone with a large dome and large horns on Pachycephalosaurus,
Mm-hmm.
which sort of doesn't work with this dichotomy because it's like, well, they're either using their dome head for a type of attack or they're using the points on the back of their head for a different type of attack. But in Prehistoric Planet 2, it has both going on.
Mm-hmm.
I do like how it was both a weapon and a display structure because the males seem to have both a brighter red coloring on their domes and also a larger dome than the females. Although it's interesting that both the males and the females in the show had some pretty sizable horns.
Yeah.
The horns are much larger than the American Museum of Natural History specimen, which is the one I always envision with Pachycephalosaurus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one with the little bumps on the back of the head. And I think the one that you usually see reconstructed if you get like any sort of Pachycephalosaur toy, they usually have these little bumps on the back of the head, not huge horns.
That's how I remember it in Land Before Time, too.
Yeah, the horns are more like the Sandy nicknamed specimen that's at the ROM in Canada, or Stygimoloch, if you consider Stygimoloch to be its own genus, or just the ones that are, the Pachycephalosaurs that used to be called Stygimoloch. But like you said, in Prehistoric Planet, Pachycephalosaurus do both direct headbutting, but they also do some flank butting, and that ended up being the most effective strategy in the fight too.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of thought that was a nice little nod. I wonder if that was sort of in reference to this paper or some of this research where it's like flank butting might have still been really important, not just headbutting. There have been quite a few papers on whether or not Pachycephalosaurus could headbutt
Mm-hmm.
and similar Pachycephalosaurs. A paper by Snively and Theodore in 2011 looked at modern animals that headbutt and found a pretty good analog. They found that the type of antelope called a duiker has a similar small and round dome on top of its head and is pretty close to Stegosaurus, one of the Pachycephalosaurs. There was also a paper last year by Brian Moore and others that looked at well-preserved Stegosaurus individuals and recreated its body musculature, not just the head. And what they found was that it had arms that were pretty weak, but its legs and hips were really strong, which would have had a wide, sturdy stance and relatively short, powerful legs that, quote, would have proved advantageous during hypothesized intraspecific headbutting contests, end quote.
Yeah, that's why I say this debate's going to go on for a while.
Yeah. Although, unfortunately, that paper did not mention anything about neck strength, and neither did Prehistoric Planet in there behind the scenes, which I think is still potentially the weak point in the using heads to slam into each other, because it's possible that their heads could handle a much larger impact than their neck. There is much less discussion on their necks in these studies, possibly because a lot of it boils down to the posture and the neck musculature, which is way harder to reconstruct than just looking at the skull itself and looking for scratches. But for example, if the neck was curved, sometimes it's described as having an S-curved or U-curved neck. And if they run head first with that curve in the neck, it's possible that the vertebrae could get bent at basically a fatal angle, or at least in a way that seriously injured the animal. But it is much harder to reconstruct that neck posture, especially during a specific task like headbutting. So going with the evidence on the skulls, I think makes a lot of sense. And even though when I first saw it in Prehistoric Planet, I was like, oh, they're doing the headbutting.
Mm-hmm.
That's bold. After digging through the research, I think that most of the recent research agrees with it. And I don't think there's going to be a big outcry of like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
That's not what we think.
Prehistoric Planet does a good job with the research.
Yeah. I don't think it's in the same vein as the air bubbles on the Dreadnoughtus neck. It's just sort of like totally out of left field.
Well, not totally, but yeah, more speculative. So to film that Pachycephalosaurus headbutting scene, they went to Lake Morena County Park in California, which is a remote reservoir in San Diego County. They've got 8 miles of trails and you can camp and fish there.
There's a lot of camping and hiking, fishing going on in swamps.
Makes sense. And then last in the episode, we go to the Hell Creek Formation, where again we see T-Rex, Edmontosaurus, and Triceratops. They're at a watering hole. Because there's so many dinosaurs around, there's too many eyes on the T-Rex, so they don't try to attack. It's a pair of them. But they do go for Edmontosaurus at night, because sneaky T-Rex has large eyes, which are good for low light vision, so they can go on these night hunts. And in Prehistoric Planet, they are nearly silent with the cushioned pads on their feet.
Yeah, we've seen some research on that, where basically theropods like T-Rex literally tiptoed and would have been very quiet even though they weighed several tons. Our feet are really sloppy and rigid compared to theropod feet. Their long toes really gracefully cushion their landing. It's really cool. If you ever get a chance to look at slow-mo footage of like a bird walking, or if you can ever just watch a bird walk, their whole foot changes shape so dramatically when they take steps. It's not just like ours, which is sort of like a little hinge flapping. It's like it's more like if you use your hands to walk around on the ground, like you can use your fingers to like gently rest down on the ground.
I bet there's some humans that walk quietly, like ballerinas.
Yeah, it's possible to do pretty well. Like if you literally tiptoe, like that's why people tiptoe when they're being quiet. But if you're doing heel strikes, it's a lot louder. But dinosaurs never did heel strikes. They always landed with their tips of their toes and then slowly rested the rest of their foot down on the ground.
No tap dancing for dinosaurs.
Nope. We also saw a paper years ago where they even argued that the angle between theropod toes helped to conceal the sound of the footsteps, which I thought was really interesting. But basically, since not all of the energy is pointed straight in front of them, it sort of goes out to the side on the two side toes. That might help make them even quieter.
So yeah, these quiet T-Rex, they're hunting together. They split up and they surround the Edmontosaurus herd. And then one deliberately makes a sound to scare the Edmontosaurus.
Yeah, I thought that was a really clever way to have T-Rex roar right before attacking, but in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, because usually you're quiet when you're hunting.
Yeah, animals don't usually shout to alert their prey right as they're about to attack. They stay as quiet as possible all the way up. And, you know, what's even the point in yelling at any point? Put your energy into the attack, not yelling.
You yell if you're trying to defend yourself, maybe, and seem more ferocious.
Exactly. Or scare off a competitor or something, not when you're in the middle of a sneak attack. Yeah. In the narration, they talk about like it intentionally makes a noise, which I wonder if they're alluding to all these other documentaries where T-Rex is just like charging and roaring, but for no reason, and then has to chase it.
Could be. So, yeah, one roars to scare the Edmontosaurus, and then the other T-Rex rushes out, and the Edmontosaurus, the herd, they run, but it's a trap. And one Edmontosaurus runs to one of the T-Rex, and now they have their food.
Yeah, I rewatched that scene a couple times, and the last time was on my computer screen, so I could get the brightness higher because it is a pretty dark scene. But there is a lot of detail of the kill in that scene. You can see that one T-Rex bites onto it, the one that's waiting in the ambush, and then the one that originally was chasing them just to scare them joins in and basically tackles the Edmontosaurus by like headbutt ramming its flank and knocking it to the ground, and then they sort of pin it down together to finish it off. So it's an interesting combination of like how it hunted together, and it wasn't just like, well, it had the strongest bite force and that's all it needed. It was still using other techniques in order to win that hunt.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting recurring theme in this season, I noticed, was the idea of predators hunting together or in packs. So we've got the pair of T-Rex here, but there's also in the Badlands, the Velociraptor pack kind of work together with the Tarbosaurus.
Yeah. And some of it's sort of incidental, or maybe they're thinking like, oh, I hope the Tarbosaurus does this. And other times it's more carefully planned, like in this case.
Yeah. Or in the first episode
with the Hotsegopteryx.
Well, I was thinking the Imperator going after Morosaurus. There was a group of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all different levels of coordination possible.
So to film this T-Rex night hunt, they went to Bog Pond. So they went to a bog in Waterford, Maine. It's about 40 acres. There's a lot of fish there and beavers. There's beaver dams around, and a forest surrounds the pond that's mostly fir and cedar.
I wonder if it's actually a bog, if it is full of fish and beavers.
Oh.
Because sometimes things are named weirdly.
Good point. I did not know enough about bogs when I was looking that up.
Yeah.
Now, apparently it took, on a VFX note, more than 65,000 hours to render the T-Rex night hunt scene. So you can imagine how many hours it took to make the whole prehistoric planet too.
Yeah. I mean, there is a ton of detail. I recommend, if you can, either cranking up the brightness on your TV or a computer screen so you can really see the details of that scene, because there's so much you can see, like different angles of the Edmontosaurus and the T-Rex and how they're moving during the hunt is really cool.
Now, according to assistant producer Leah Arnold, to film the dinosaurs gathering in the swamplands, quote, each day we loaded 2 flat-bottom fishing boats and several kayaks and crossed a small lake. The transition between water and land was not very defined, so we built a temporary platform on the bog as a base to tie up boats and keep equipment dry. But out on the bog, so she keeps saying bog, it must be a real bog.
Yeah.
There were more challenges. If the crew stayed put too long, we found we would slowly sink. So by wearing snowshoes, we were able to spread our weight and prevent getting sucked in. While the camera was rolling, the whole crew had to hold very still or the ground would jiggle like a giant waterbed, making the shot unstable. At times, what looked like a safe route was a thin layer of bog plants hiding waist-deep water. Director Tom Brainerd fell in at least once, but being well over 6 feet tall, it was not too deep for him.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Yeah, she also said that they had to watch out for sudden thunderstorms. Quote, you don't want to be standing in a saturated ground when lightning strikes, so there was a quick evacuation when we spotted lightning on the horizon.
Oh, man. That's something you imagine as one of the hazards of being in a swamp.
Yeah.
Lightning. But it makes sense.
It does.
I like that they were wearing snowshoes so that it gets sucked into all the like decaying plant matter.
Gotta be careful in the bog.
Yeah, that episode was great.
They were all great. It's hard to choose, but although one of my favorite scenes is in that episode. The mud bathing scene.
Oh, yeah. I liked that opening scene with the Ashdar kids and the crocodilomorph trying to snatch them out of the air. It's so intense. And in just a moment, we'll get on to our dinosaur of the day, Falcatakely. But first, we're going to pause for one last sponsor break.
And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Falcatakely or Falcatakely. And I'll admit, we are taking some liberties here with this dinosaur of the day because, it's not necessarily in Prehistoric Planet 2, but it's not necessarily not in Prehistoric Planet 2. I guess we know from the press notes now that it wasn't. But there's one quick shot of a flock of birds in episode 3, in the swamp episode, and you can't see too many details, but the tail of those birds look kind of similar to Falcatakely.
It's a very distant shot of a flock of birds. They don't mention what any of the birds are, though.
That's true. So it could be. Leave it to the imagination.
There aren't that many birds from this formation, so it's one of only a few options.
Yeah, it's an Antiornithine. It lived around the same time and place as the animals featured in the episode, so why not?
And it's just really cool.
Yeah, as I said, it's lived in the late Cretaceous in what is now northern Madagascar in the May-Verano Formation. It was about crow-sized. It had a deep, long beak, about 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters long.
Okay, so it's not quite as toucan-like as I had imagined from the paleo art.
It did look similar to a toucan's.
But not quite as big, I guess.
Yeah. As an Antiornithine, in many ways, it would have looked like a modern bird because it had a high, long face like a modern bird, but it had teeth in the premaxilla.
That's a big difference between modern birds having teeth.
Yes. Falcatakely was described by Patrick O'Connor and others in 2020, so it's a relatively recent one. They found a nearly complete, well-preserved skull back in 2010, and they CT scanned the skull in 2017. The skull is small. It's about 3 inches or 8 centimeters long.
Oh, so the beak is like longer than the skull.
It's a big beak. And parts of the fossil are paper thin, like the maxilla is less than 1 millimeter thick.
Oh boy. I'm glad they had a CT scanner so they didn't have to try to prep all that out.
Yeah. Falcatakely had a narrow preorbital region that's in front of the eye socket. The type and only species is Falcatakely forsterae. The genus name means small scythe, and it refers to the shape of the beak.
Scythe beak.
Yeah.
Small scythe beak.
And the species name is in honor of Catherine Forster's, quote, contributions to work on Madagascan paravians. So it was unexpected for the paleontologist that Falcatakely looked superficially like a toucan.
Wait, what is a toucan doing here?
Yeah.
In Madagascar 68 million years ago.
What's an example of convergent evolution because it evolved this toucan-like beak tens of millions of years before toucans and other modern birds, and it's also pretty distantly related
Yeah,
to
it's
a
an
toucan.
enantiornithine, right?
Yeah. They found a complex series of grooves on the bone, and that's what showed that it had a large beak. And this beak shape is like a modern bird with a high, long upper bill. However, its face had similar bones as Velociraptor and other non-avian dinosaurs. Unlike non-avian dinosaurs, it had a bone under its beak and a large upper jawbone, so a large maxilla and small premaxilla. This is unlike modern birds where there's just one bone under the beak, the premaxilla. Falcatakely probably used its beak for a lot of purposes, including moving objects and grooming and feeding, and of course it lived in a swampy floodplain that had wet and dry seasons.
And it's a little cutie.
Mm-hmm.
Except for the teeth. Make it a little less cute.
Yeah, watch out for the teeth.
And our fun fact of the day is that T-Rex has the largest eyes of any dinosaur.
That does not surprise me.
That was, as they put it in Prehistoric Planet 2, but it actually has the largest eyes of any land animal, period.
Wow.
Yeah. As the American Museum of Natural History puts it, an adult T-Rex has eyes the size of oranges.
Navel oranges or mandarin oranges? That can vary.
I saw the orange reference a few places, and then I went to verify it. But the precise estimate I got for the actual size of a T-Rex eye is bigger than just about any oranges that I've seen, navel or otherwise. They're about 13 to 16 centimeters in diameter, about 5 to 6 inches, and weighed about 2 kilograms or about 4 to 5 pounds. So that's closer in size to an average grapefruit and about 4 times as heavy as a typical grapefruit.
I wonder where orange came in.
I don't know. I think maybe more people know what an orange is than a grapefruit. There are different categories. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds of how they size produce, but the largest size of orange is in that range.
Okay.
So it's like an extremely, like how you can get eggs in different sizes. If you get like the biggest version of oranges,
Yeah.
they get to this point. But an average grapefruit is that size. There was a study a few months ago about how T-Rex could have even had bigger eyes, but it sacrificed larger eyes for a stronger bite. Pretty sure we covered this on the show. And it has like that keyhole-shaped eye socket, which helps with the strength. And in the study, they found that if T-Rex had the same eye proportions as smaller dinosaurs, their eyes would have been just over 30 centimeters or 1 foot in diameter and weighed about 19 kilograms or 42 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
So rather than orange-sized, if you start with the largest bowling ball allowed in U.S. 10-pin bowling competitions, which is 16 pounds, and I think a little over 8.5 inches in diameter, this hypothetical huge T-Rex eye would be about 3 times the volume of that bowling ball and almost 3 times as heavy, which is crazy. And obviously, maybe not something that T-Rex wants to lug around in its head because there are diminishing returns on eye size. So the trade-off of only having the largest eyes on land by a small margin in order to have the strongest bite in the world by a wide margin is probably worth it. The largest eyes of any living land animal are still on a dinosaur. They're found in the ostrich.
Oh, yeah, they do have large eyes.
We might have talked about this before, but the ostrich eye is about 2 inches or 5 centimeters in diameter, and that means they should have a mass right around 60 grams or 2 ounces. Eyes basically have the same density as water, just like a lot of body parts. That's what I'm basing that on. For comparison, our eyes are about 24 millimeters in diameter, or just under an inch, and they have a mass of around just about 7 grams, which makes them about 1/10 the mass of an ostrich eye and less than 1% the size of the actual T-Rex eye, not the hypothetical one, but the real one.
And that's why it would be a lot harder for us to go hunt for Edmontosaurus at night.
Yeah, I think so. T-Rex also had some pretty good brain power dedicated to vision. They have the T-Rex puppet from the show T-Rex Autopsy at the Australian Museum, and it has the eye pulled out of its head, and you can really appreciate how big it is.
Oh, yeah, it's in its own little stand.
Yeah, I really like it. Their museum sign mentions, too, that if it had those little bones around the eye called the sclerotic ring, it would have been able to focus more quickly, which I thought was interesting. And I think it might have also been useful for supporting such a large eye, because we know that's one of the purposes of a sclerotic ring is sort of supporting the eye. And if they're getting that big, I could see a good use for it there. In all the close-ups of the eye in Prehistoric Planet, you can also see its nictitating membrane, that horizontal second eyelid that birds and crocodiles have. And it definitely makes it look extra creepy seeing that thing.
You can see that not just in the T-Rex in Prehistoric Planet, but in a few of the dinosaurs.
Yes. Yeah, because they probably all had them, right? Because if birds have them and crocodiles have them, their common ancestor probably had it. And that also includes dinosaurs. So that's our best guess. Those don't really fossilize, little thin piece of eyelid. In these world's largest eye of a land animal, the word land is very important.
Oh, because fish have big eyes?
There are a lot of animals with bigger eyes in the ocean. For example, just one example, the big eye tuna,
right in the name,
aptly named, has eyes up to about 4 inches or about 10 centimeters in diameter, which is bigger than the ostrich, but not as big as a T-Rex. I point them out just because they're vertebrates and they have fairly similar eyes to us. They hunt in deep water using vision, which is why they evolved those big eyes. Very helpful. Big eye thresher sharks.
These things all just big eye something or other.
I guess when you fish one out of the ocean, you're like, look at those big eyes. What should we call it? I guess the big eye thresher shark. So the big eye thresher shark have similar sized eyes, but maybe a little bit larger than the big eye tuna. I couldn't easily find what the largest eyes of any big-eyed fish. Maybe there's even one that isn't called big-eyed that has big eyes. But the main reason it's hard to find this is because squid blow everything else away. And when you try to find out what's the biggest eye on a fish? They're like, you mean a squid? Because the squids are the one with the really big eyes. So giant squid have eyes that are often described as the size of dinner plates, which is accurate. It's crazy how big they are. They're not perfectly round, as is often the case with eyes. Our eyes aren't perfectly round either. But as eyes get bigger, sometimes they tend to get a little more squished in one direction than the others. Giant squid have eyes that can reach 25 centimeters or 10 inches in diameter.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's bigger than a soccer ball or volleyball. And
next time you hold one of those balls, just think about it as an eyeball.
Yeah. Although it would have been a little squished, so yeah.
You can squish a soccer ball a little bit.
Oh, that's true. It's way, way bigger than a T-Rex eye. And then even bigger than the giant squid is the colossal squid.
Sure, it's right in the name.
It is. They have eyes that can reach 27 centimeters or 11 inches. They might be able to reach even bigger. We have very few examples of colossal squid, but one of them that was actually recovered and measured was 27 centimeters. That's similar in size to that theoretical bug-eyed T-Rex, but it's an actual animal living today in the ocean. So yes, the ocean has bigger, scarier eyes than anything on land. But on land, the dinosaurs, either T-Rex in the past or ostrich today.
It's kind of like when you talk about on land, dinosaurs were the biggest animals, but then enter whales in the ocean.
Yeah. I did look up whales, mentioning whales. Blue whales have the biggest eyes of any living vertebrate according to Guinness, with a diameter of 10.9 centimeters or 4.3 inches. Although they note that the big eye thresher shark is another contender, but the eye shapes are different, so it's a little bit hard to compare. For the thresher shark, they say, quote, unusually, their eyes are bigger vertically than they are horizontally and are shaped more like an upside-down pear rather than being spherical. They also point out that ichthyosaurs had eyes about the size of the giant squid, or possibly even bigger than the colossal squid on some species. So it's definitely possible for vertebrates to get enormous eyes too. It's not just a squid thing. And some animals definitely surpassed T-Rex, especially in the oceans.
Interesting. Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. If you want even more dinosaur goodness delivered to your inbox, head over to iknowdino.com and sign up for our newsletter. And stay tuned for next week, where we have an interview with the scientific consultant and advisor for Prehistoric Planet, Darren Naish. Thanks again, and until next time.